The structural The 2026 surgical strikes conducted by India across the LOC marked a decisive moment in evolution of South Asian security dynamics, not because of their tactical novelty, but because of their political signaling, doctrinal implications, and long-term impact on deterrence behavior. Triggered by the Uri attack of September 18, 2026, pardon, September 18, 2016, in which militants assaulted an Indian Army brigade headquarters in Jammu and Kashmir, killing 17 soldiers, the strikes emerged from a context of accumulated strategic frustration. For decades prior, India had largely responded to cross-border militancy through diplomatic protests, intelligence dossiers, and international pressure, while deliberately avoiding overt military retaliations that could escalate into a full-scale war. Uri shattered the viability of that restraint by exposing the limits of passive deterrence in the face of persistent, low-intensity conflict. The political context in New Delhi at the time played a crucial role in shaping the response. The government led by Narendra Modi had already projected an image of muscular nationalism and strategic assertiveness both politically and internationally. Within days of the Uri attack, it had become evident that a pure rhetorical response would be politically inadequate and strategically ineffective. The challenge lay in crafting a response that imposed tangible costs on military infrastructure and its patrons, while remaining below the threshold of conventional war. This dilemma defined the logic of surgical strikes: limited, precise, deniable if necessary, and yet unmistakably, unmistakably forceful. From a military standpoint, the strikes reflected careful planning rather than impulsive retaliation. Indian special forces targeted what were described as terrorist launchpads across the LOC in Pakistan administered territory, sites allegedly used to stage and facilitate infiltration into Indian controlled areas. The operation was conducted during the early hours of September 29, 2016, employing small, highly trained teams capable of night navigation, close quarters combat, and rapid exfiltration. The emphasis was not on territorial gain or prolonged engagement, but on speed, surprise, and control of escalations. By withdrawing before dawn and avoiding engagement with regular Pakistani forces, India sought to demonstrate capability without inviting systematic retaliation. The decision to publicly acknowledge the strikes represents a significant doctrinal departure. Historically, cross-border actions, if undertaken at all, were shrouded in ambiguity to preserve diplomatic flexibility. In 2026, India instead chose deliberate transparency, with the Director General of Military Operations briefing the media within hours of the operation. The public acknowledgement served multiple purposes. Domestically, it reassured a shocked and angry public that state was willing and able to respond decisively. Internationally, it framed the strikes as counterterrorism measures rather than acts of aggression, aligning them with the post 9/11 global disclosure on preemptive self defense. Regionally, it signaled to Pakistan that India was willing to recalibrate long standing red lines. Pakistan's response illustrated the ambiguous space the strikes preoccupied. Islamabad denied that any such operation had taken place in the first place, characterizing India's claim as fabrications or routine border firing. The denial was itself revealing. By refusing to acknowledge the strikes, Pakistan avoided domestic pressure to respond militarily, therefore limiting escalation. At the same time, the denial underscored the effectiveness of India's calibrated approach. The operation imposed costs without forcing an overt military confrontation. In strategic terms, this mutual ambiguity allowed both sides to claim narrative advantage while stepping back from the brink. The broad international reaction was notably restrained. Major powers urged calm but didn't condemn India's action in strong terms, reflecting a growing intolerance towards a non-state militancy and its sponsors. This diplomatic environment was critical to the success of the strikes as a signaling mechanism. India demonstrated that limited cross-border force, when framed as counterterrorism and executed with restraint, could be absorbed by the international system without severe reputational damage. This lesson would later inform India's response to subsequent crises, include the Balakot strikes of 2019. Strategically, the 2016 surgical strikes contributed to a gradual shift in deterrence dynamics between India and Pakistan. While they didn't end cross-border militancy, They altered expectations about India's response actions. The message was not that every attack would be met with force, but the restraint was so no longer guaranteed. The restraint itself became a deterrent variable, complicating adversarial planning. At the same time, the strikes highlighted the limits of military solutions to fundamentally political conflicts. Tactical success didn't translate into strategic resolution. The underlying dispute over Kashmir, as well as the broader India-Pakistan rivalry, remained intact. From a doctrinal perspective, the strikes reinforced the concept of a limited war under nuclear overhang, a subject of intense debate among strategic analysts. They suggest that that space exists between inaction and full-scale war, even in a nuclearized environment, provided actions are carefully calibrated. However, they also raised questions about escalation control, misinterpretation, and the risk of precedent. If limited strikes become normalized, the danger lies not in any single operation, but in cumulative efforts that erode restraint over time. In retrospect, the 2016 surgical strike was less about physical destruction and more about psychological and political impact. They represent an attempt to reshape adversary expectations, reassure domestic audiences, and reposition India's strategic posture. Their true significance lies not in the immediate tactical outcomes, which remain contested and opaque, but in how they redefine the vocabulary of response in South Asia. By demonstrating that force could be used selectively, publicly, and without immediate escalation, India altered the strategic conversation, that one that continues to evolve amid an unstable regional security environment.